Thank you, Kyle.
My question is very nuts and bolts. How did you, Ryan, pull off funding this experiment from the beginning to where you find yourself now?
Right.
Because I find
right.
that to be difficult to imagine how you go about doing that.
Yeah. Well, we ended up with 7 different streams in order to make a budget. You know, kind of like handicraft, fundraisers, ELCA national, ELCA local, congregations, individual donors, tithes and offerings. Is that 7? You know, and honestly, for the first 3 years, it was just like, that was like 50% of the work. Yeah. And that was exhausting. Now we're at a place where we feel sustainable, but we're really not. The reason why we're sustainable is because I'm at quarter time right now, and that's not going to last, you know, because I'm finishing, you know, some of my master's work, and then I'm going to need to, you know, actually feed my baby. So, I don't know yet, you know. I don't know what's going to be kind of the long-term funding source. Yeah.
Tom, I was going to ask, could you talk a little bit? We're getting permission to share something.
Oh, well, you tell it.
Okay. I had to get his permission to say it. What Ryan is not telling you is what I received from him when I visited him 6 years ago. I remember you sitting at the table saying to me, "There's so many things we got to work on. We need money for this. We need money for that. I don't want to be the primary drain on the budget here." And I remember you saying to me, I have a friend who's at this church. It was a free church, non-denominational or something kind of a church. And you said, if I have to go clean their buildings to support this, I'm going to. I'm actually exploring this right now. And I realized in that moment that Ryan was coming from a place of passionate longing for the future of this community such that he was willing to try anything to make the money part of it work. And that stood out for me right there from the beginning of our conversation, sitting there drinking his mint tea and hearing him say, I'll do what it takes to fund this.
Yeah. I don't believe that anymore.
You don't?
I'm so sorry.
That was then.
I'm so sorry.
This is now. We did not rehearse that transition.
I mean, I have been willing to do everything, and something has shifted in me. And it has to do with like providing for my kids, because I think at that stage I could do whatever I wanted and worry about money later. Mm-hmm. And I'm at a different place now, and I kind of lament that in a way, you know, because I could make that work for a long time that way. Mm-hmm. But if you do have a job for me, I will consider it.
Tom, as we do a transition, could you say a little bit about, because you're in touch with a lot of leaders who are initiating things like this, some of the different models that funding looks like in some different places? Yeah,
so Eric Law has done a great job gathering up examples of ministry, embedded ministry that also has worshiping community attached. And he's calling the missional ministry that is actually engaged in the world. We had a group that was talking about lived gospel or service as gospel. What was that? What was the invitation? Was that you, Tom? Tom. Yeah, there it is. So we have a growing number of businesses that are really ministry in the world. And a great number of them, but we just don't know to pay attention to them because the institution has tuned our lenses to look primarily for worshiping communities that find ways to sustain themselves. And so many of our young leaders and young at heart leaders, some of these are in their 60s and 70s, are saying, screw that model. I want to be so embedded in the community and recognized for the gifts that we bring such that the community is committed to sustaining us, and then have a worshiping community attached to that. So it's like this. We have a business that feels like ministry, and we have a worshiping community attached. We have bookstores that are operating as worshiping communities on the weekends. We have a beautiful priest up in the mountains who runs a ranch for special needs children, and the parents come together on weekends to worship together. We've got a guy I just met with 2 weeks ago who runs the center of town's soda fountain, and he's an Episcopal priest He spends half his time in the soda fountain offering pastoral care to the whole community there in his mountain community, and he only spends like a third of his time in the church office. And his greatest challenge was teaching the church community to respect that decision, that commitment that he was making. Two of my dearest friends started an after-school program in North Sacramento, primarily with non-Anglo communities. After doing all their community organizing one-on-ones, 11 years ago they started with no money, no cash. Today they have 8 sites. They work with 700 families. They have 40 staff, and it's all paid for cash with no help from their faith traditions. And on Saturday nights, they have an interfaith worshiping community that averages about 1,000 people, only for those whom they serve in their after-school programs. Fully interfaith, all led by the teenagers, written by the teenagers, served by the teenagers, and it focuses on poetry, prayer, and food, and music that they write and lead together. And it has a worshiping community attached on Saturday evenings. We have so many examples like this. Again, we don't know to look for them because we always look for tall steeples that have sustainable ministries attached to them. And these leaders are flipping that completely. So some of us are called to be intrapreneurs, working from within established systems. We often make the mistake of calling those entrepreneurs, when in reality, an entrepreneur is somebody who works outside of an existing system and starts by responding to the need in the community. So their primary motivation is community need, and then finding ways to match that up with the institution. Many of us are trying to make that shift. And this is where some of our leaders face the greatest challenge. They're shifting from institutional anxiety as primary motivation, and they're saying, oh, God, help us to make what the Spirit is doing out in the world around us our primary motivation, and let the institution bury the dead.
We had another question over here, didn't we?
In the spirit of storytelling, would you talk a little bit about your spousal support? Because a lot of times, a lot of us are married people, and our spouses are either not involved, uninvolved, or think about being involved, and then they say, and what that means in relationship.
Yeah. I'm kind of being frank today. I don't know. I mean, my wife lives together with our children with 10 other people, so she's made such a commitment to this community. She does shopping for the community. So we have a common kitchen, and so she shops for food for all these people. She's been all in, and she's also an introvert, and I am wildly extroverted. So it totally works for me, and sometimes it doesn't work for her. And she, luckily the house is big enough that she has private space to do that. But I think there is a longing in my family to have some private space together, and I think we're coming upon that season pretty soon.
I lived for a little while in an intentional community that was around Jason Evans' house. And our friend Laurel Mathewson, who was also in that community, said sometimes communities develop and they have a lot more common space. And sometimes communities that involve families, the denominator is kitchen. If different family groups have their own kitchens, it's a very different interactive system.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, food.
Another question, Tom?
I think I have to put question in quotation marks now because you guys have already been speaking to so much of what I was curious of, so I don't know if I have a question anymore. Because the topic of finances, of course, came up, and for me, one of the biggest hurdles, I've kind of sort of done things with intentional community, ministry. I'm really interested, trying to figure out where I fit in all of it, but it often feels as if some of the biggest hurdles are I've got I was about to swear. I've got a really big pile of student debt, and I just got married. I don't, my wife, it's kind of that whole thing of, she won't necessarily be all in on the same things that I am.
Yeah, right.
And so trying to grapple with all this while still living out faith and ministry, making it viable so I don't slay myself.
Yeah.
And so you guys have already talked about this a little bit. I don't know if I can ask you to keep talking about it, and that's why I'm not sure if I have a question.
I'll jump on that too, yeah. I'd love to jump on that, Tom. I believe with all my heart that there's always more money available than we realize. And that most of the time what you're proposing is a very different ask than most church people know how to make. We've learned this from diocesan leaders committed to planting new ministries. And when they cast a vision for new ministries, they realize that the people they need to go to ask to fund that Alleluia Fund or New Ministry Fund typically are very differently motivated than the people who support the diocesan budget, for example, or the parish budget. So it's a different ask, and it's often different people, and it's totally contingent on whether or not you're willing to partner with them around a compelling vision that would ask them to give of their best self. This is the part that's often missing. What we ask for in partnership often sounds like the ask they already paid at the office on behalf of established church, because we don't differentiate ourselves from the typical established church ask. We're going to go on for the next 12 years, and our goal is to have a tall steeple and a permanent presence in the community that really engages young people. That's what it sounds like. It's not what we say, but it's what it sounds like. So a couple of things. One is Charles LaFond has done a really beautiful job about talking about stewardship for the sake of the future of mission, not for the sake of funding a dying institution. And I would recommend his book, Fearless Fundraising. Another one is TENS has some loyal dissidents in it that are increasingly saying, okay, we've covered the waterfront on funding the church as it is. Who among us is willing to model what it means to ask people who are marginally associated with the institution but passionate about the future of God's mission in the world? How do we engage that conversation? They would love to have you join them in that exploration. Typically, though, it means that you align yourself with a vision for ministry that other people can own. So it's not about paying off your student loan. It's about making an urban school for ministry that teaches people ministry without charging them with incredible debt. Did you hear the shift there between the two? The latter, the second one, gives them the option of joining you around a passion that you have for the future of ministry. Sometimes it's, first of all, changing our own self-image. Changing the self-image of the one asking. Are you really excited about paying off your student loans? Or are you really excited about offering engaged ministry where you're not hampered by student loans? There's a big difference in terms of the one you're asking. Does that get at what you were asking, though?
I'm interested in this room. I know when I was hired as a campus minister in the Diocese of San Diego, they could make a commitment to me for 2 months because that's how much funding they had. I was coming back from Honduras, and so 2 months felt like it was better than the 1 month of insurance the church was going to give me to come back. So, but I'm interested to know how many of you fundraise a portion or have had anxiety about a portion of your budget that includes your salary as part of your ministry. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
I think that this is a big conversation in campus and young adult ministry, and knowing the ways that the church operates. The other thing that just blew my mind yesterday, Chris Robinson and I were sitting around having a beer last night after everything was done with a group of people, and we were talking about the statistics that come out from the Episcopal Church about, average Sunday attendance. You know what the average Sunday attendance in the Episcopal Church, I don't know if it's the mean or the median, but what that is for a congregation? Kyle, do you remember the number?
The number I had in my head was like 68, 69.
Yeah, it's like 68 or 69 people in a church. Do you know what the total pledge and plate, not income from investments or anything like that, but pledge and plate within the Episcopal Church was last year? It was 1.3 billion plus. There are resources there, and that's what people are already giving to. So finding new ways to do asking and to trust that there is an abundance within the church. there are an abundance. It takes some legwork sometimes, and it takes learning to do things in new ways. But there is an abundance.
So in the Northwest Washington Synod, we've come to a place now where we won't start a new start unless there's at least several established congregations who are partnering with that. And I don't know what it's like in the Episcopal Church, but I mean, in the next 10 years, we'll certainly have at least 10% of our congregations close. And I don't know what the plan is for those assets and kind of what vision there is. But
we can probably talk some more about this very issue. We're really grateful to have Ryan and Tom with us this afternoon. But the questions around where the assets are, and it's a conversation I think we all need to be in. And to help the church. That was one of the joys that I had as a campus minister. The close of the story is that we started partnering with local parishes around La Jolla, which is not a non-affluent community, it's an affluent community. We more than tripled the size of the campus ministry budget. I had plenty of salary. We grew my salary. We were able to hire somebody in. And so after I went off to seminary. And the funny thing about that is the leadership dynamics, which we also want to talk about a little bit in the context of this conference. Tom Brackett and I didn't say in the introduction, and I meant to, have the distinguished honor of both having replanted the same campus ministry. And after both of us built it up, and both of us built funding structures up for that campus ministry, the institution was not ready to help continue to nurture that, and so somebody else is going to have to replant a campus ministry at the University of California, San Diego, because the last leaders just graduated out and it's dormant again. So it's part of the life of this kind of work is constantly working on where do we find the resources and the leadership that we need to make these things happen.